Hello, insiders, and welcome to this new episode of the EU Bubble Insider. Today, we speak with Philip Weiss, the founder and CEO of ZN, the chief hyperthinker of Brussels, and also the master of ceremony behind the EU influencer ranking and awards. Philip, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Very, very happy to be here and very much looking forward to our conversation.
Philip, I remember when I started working in Brussels, that was more or less 10 years ago. Doing digital communication was challenging, but you started your path with and I think I can use that word, evangelizing the Brussels bubble about the digital side of communication 25 years ago. So I would really like to start with asking you to take us back to that moment when you launched ZN. Can you recall what was the idea back then? What was your message to the market?
Yeah, so this was in 1998, 25 years ago, more than 25 years ago. And my idea when I graduated, and I studied PPE, philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford. So nothing specific, it kind of, it's a wide canvas. And I had done a couple of projects in communication, one of them being a student magazine and then a student radio station. So I was really interested in communication, and I came across the internet at Oxford, and I was kind of told by science students that it was this network of computers and that you had to go in a computer room to access it. No computers in our room. This was just early days of mobile phones, so we didn't have that communication. So I started using email. I was actually number 3 in my college. So I had the Christchurch number 3, which was the name of my email. And I started to use that email to get the students in the radio station to coordinate activities. We had several hundred students at some point, so it was organizing meetings, organizing strategic discussions, etc. And I thought this is a really powerful tool to get people to exchange ideas on specific topics. And I was also a reader of Orson Scott Card, Ender's Game. I don't know if you're familiar with that book. It's a book and a movie, sci-fi. And basically in that book, which was written in 75 or something like that, he describes a network of computers that gives you the access to all the information in the world. And there is actually a political struggle in some future world where people are creating anonymous personas on this digital network to influence political conversation. And I just thought this is interesting. When I heard about the internet, I thought this is happening. And so I started to really follow this. And then as I graduated and finished the radio station project, I decided I want to look at what is happening in this space and how is this new network going to change the way we communicate. And I believe that this was going to be transformative. I didn't know when and how, but I thought this is really, really important. And I had this vision. So I came to Brussels. I grew up in Brussels. So I wanted to be there and see what I could do. I wanted to start a company. I had a number of different projects. One of them was, looking at the internet as a communication tool for corporates and, organizations to communicate. And so I started the company. I called it ZN. ZN means Zeitgeist Net. So Zeitgeist is the spirit of the times. And the idea was, I want to understand this changing environment. I want to understand how this new digital landscape is going to change the way we communicate. And I thought it was going to be fundamental. Again, I didn't know how, but I was very interested to just find out. And then I thought, okay, let's go out there and maybe create websites and define strategies. Since I had my kind of analytical background, I thought, okay, I have an understanding of politics. So I thought I can look at strategic elements of this. And I started conversations with people in Brussels. I worked actually with some of the biggest communication groups, Burson Marsteller at the time. now Burson after multiple names, Edelman, Shandwick. So I spoke to them and they said, yeah, this internet thing looks interesting. Can we work with you? Not as an employee, but as a company, so a partnership, where you tell our clients what is interesting for them on the internet. And so
So
that's
I'm sorry, you were working with political clients from the start, just not directly.
Yeah, so basically, so actually with Burson Marsteller, we had a joint venture called BMZN. So it was not BM, it was us together. I would go into the meeting, I would be the internet guy, and they would say, okay, well, this is the strategy from a political perspective. And then I said, well, I looked at this. There's some news groups talking about you. There's a website attacking you. There's a campaign here. And that this was pre-social media. So we were looking a lot at news groups and discussion lists, which were already very interesting and quite powerful. So people think all of this is Twitter and Facebook, but actually before that, a lot of online conversations were already significant enough for these companies to say, yes, we want to bring you in front of our clients and we want to have these conversations. So I started with some of these companies. I also work with Dentsu, a large Japanese advertising agency, where we helped them on the marketing side. So I had this interesting perspective between marketing and public affairs. And kind of the common factor was how the internet was transforming both those spaces and how we could help our clients. And so what happened was that indeed at the beginning, I was the person saying, well, this is the internet. It has all these groups and these websites, and we analyze them, we research them, and we look at what's happening. And people were saying, yeah, this is like, the last slide on the deck or something to think about because maybe it's interesting. And then we started these small projects like, okay, maybe let's create a website on this particular topic. We actually launched quite early some pretty interesting projects. I did a project called EIF, the European Internet Foundation, which is actually still there today. I launched this with Peter Linton, who was working with Burson Marsteller at the time. And this was an association to basically discuss the future of the internet in Europe. And it had MEPs, companies as members. And so at that point, people already realized it was important. So we were doing that. And then we did some pretty interesting projects. But we then hit the dot-com bust. So that was our first cycle. We went into the dot-com boom, but not at all from the point of view of launching a website or a company, but really more on how to service companies on this new space. And then after the first bust, 2001, people became very skeptical. They were saying, hey, the internet is not that magical. It's a bit of a mess. It's dangerous. And so you had to say, okay, that might be the case. There was also a recession, obviously, at the same time. So what we said is, look, we can find more cost-effective ways to get your message out than traditional advertising, TV, newspapers, etc. So this is a good alternative when you're trying to cut costs. So that was one of the messages. And the second one was so then it started to become more interesting again. And it's interesting because you have this attitude where people say, it's a fascinating little thing on the side. It's terrible. We shouldn't touch it. Okay, maybe we should try again. And then, okay, we need to do something on the internet because we read about it in The Economist and the McKinsey report and people talk about it. So we need to be able to say we're doing it. And that was a lot of our projects initially. And then I think gradually it became core. It became, okay, this is something that we need. And then this is something that we need at a core strategic level. And then now...
And that was when, you think, more or less, in terms of years?
I would say that 2010, 15, people started to understand that this was very important, that they needed it. But still, very much approach from an amateur perspective. It's and by the way, you still see this today. The intern is the person who's in charge of social media. So it's not the CEO or the Sec Gen. It's like, let's push this to somebody who does it, but not as a core. And I would say after 14, 13, people started to see after the elections, and we've had number of different crises. Then it says, okay, this is where you have to do your core communication from. But again, it doesn't mean people knew how to do it. I mean, people were saying, I think that makes sense. It's probably more cost effective. And interestingly, for Europe, it's the only place where you can reach the whole of Europe from one channel, because that's impossible in the media, because you would have to go to all these different channels. And this allows you to kind of disseminate your message. And our big challenge as Europeans in the bubble is that we're focused on niche audiences. So these niche audiences, a lot of them are here in Brussels, but they're also all over Europe. And we somehow need to talk to them. And the ones that are not in Brussels tend to be left out of the conversation. And the internet is the perfect tool to bring them into the conversation. And I would say with AI, this is bringing a new level where you can actually do translations in a much more effective way. So I would say we've gone from totally marginal and slightly insane and to totally core, where everybody says, okay, internet is now the basis of our communication strategy. And then what's interesting, and this is a Brussels reaction, it's like, and now X is going, Elon Musk is going crazy. We thought we had our strategy in place, and now we need to rethink it. And so I think that's the state we're in now is the internet is accepted as a core part of communication, if not the most important element of your communication. But there's a huge amount of uncertainty. So you need to have a very adaptive approach to it.
Philip, imagine you would meet yourself from the today self, from you would meet the Philip from 25 years ago. Tell him what ZN is today and how the market and also the approach to digital communication has evolved on side of businesses and institutions. Do you think there is anything that would surprise the 25 years ago Philip about what happened?
Yeah, I think I'm an optimist. And so I would say, my God, it took so long for people to realize that this was a thing. The amount of time you heard people just dismissing digital channel because it's a novelty thing. And so it's kind of, so that surprised me. I thought the adoption would come much faster. I also imagined that the large communication groups would adapt to this also and offer it to clients. And they found that extremely difficult because basically it's still fundamentally different today. You can't approach a social media campaign the way you approach a public affairs campaign. The two should, of course, be integrated. But what I found is that it takes different people with a different mindset to be successful in both. And it's also a different business model. So that I expected people to come on and to have to kind of reinvent the business. But the fundamental business model that we have, which is digital communication strategy for our clients, hasn't changed. All the way we do it, the structure, the team, the services has changed, but not the fundamental.
Talking about mindset, because this is obviously a very important part of doing the right thing and doing the work in the right way. You are the author of this concept called hyperthinking. You wrote a book about it. You have a course that has been very popular on I think Udemy, is it right?
Right.
And hyperthinking sounds very mysterious to those who don't know it, like a buzzword that could mean many things, but it's certainly interesting. So if you don't mind, I would like to ask you to elaborate a little bit more what the concept is, how it works in practice, how you guys are using it also at ZN to do what you do best.
Yeah, so I think the idea, I developed this 10, 15 years ago, and it was a concept to describe the mindset needed to thrive in the digital age. That's in a nutshell what I was trying to define. And what I realized was that for my clients, a lot of them being corporate clients, institutional clients, they don't feel comfortable with change. So I thought, I need a framework to guide them through change. Because if you have a framework, then it's much easier than just say, hey, innovate, do new things, be entrepreneurial. Those things don't really help. So I thought, okay, how can I describe this mindset? And I came up with the idea. I thought, okay, let's use the word hyperthinking. I was inspired by lateral thinking from Edward de Bono, who wrote The Thinking Hats and a number of books. And he was actually a student at Christchurch, Oxford, where I studied a long time before me. But I thought we need a concept, a mental model to help people navigate this new space. And so I wrote it down, and then I started to say, okay, what would it entail? And then I created the 4 dimensions. And then it kind of grew over time. And it's an exercise that I think everybody should do, which is to define what they think is the most useful mental model for this day and age. By the way, for you personally, for your kids, and for your team and clients. So it kind of defines that framework. Now, the way I describe it, it has 4 key dimensions. And this is all a way to memorize, I would say, these key things and to be able to go back to them. It's like a toolkit of mental models. And so the first one is hyperlearn, which I think is the most important skill today, essentially becoming a self-learner and having self-learning practices that you put in, that you apply every single day. You're leaving space for learning. You're proactively engaging in new areas of knowledge. You're using the available tools, from podcasts to books to online courses, and you're keeping your brain challenged all the time. And I think that's a great mindset to have, a discipline that you keep. In some professions, you graduate, you start working, and then you stop really developing outside of your very technical expertise. And this is saying, no, you have to really be constantly exploring, which, by the way, I enjoy. But I think sometimes something that we gravitate away from. So that's the first one. The second one is hypershifting, and that's to shift perception. So it was initially, the paradigm shift. I had studied philosophy. I read the Theory of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn, who actually coined the phrase paradigm shift. And the idea is that you shift your mental model from one to the other. It doesn't mean the old one is invalid, but the new one has better explanatory powers, whether it's relativity or quantum mechanics or something like that. And in our world, that can just mean one model of communication or advertising, one understanding of how ideas travel, or all sorts of different mental models. So learning to shift and not to get too attached to your own preconceptions, to challenge your own preconceptions, and then explore new ones to see which one is the most useful. So that's hypershift. Then there's hyperlink. And obviously, you see the theme is all about hyperlinks, because that's
So
to make
for
the
now, I
connection
see that it's all about being open to change and development.
Open to learn, and then open to change perception, because you could very much be a learner in a field, do a PhD and do more and more advanced learning, ultra specialized. Hyperlearning for me is learning across different areas and breaking your preconceptions. This, by the way, is the hardest thing for anyone to do, because we get very attached to our own worldviews. So challenging those on a regular basis is incredibly difficult. Hyperlinking is about leveraging your digital networks. And that means understanding that we are now part of digital networks. We have digital profiles through social networks, but through a number of different things. And those are part of networks. In Brussels, it means you're maybe connected to companies, to associations, to institutions, to informal networks. And all these often exist online. And the more you can leverage those, the more you can connect them at the right time with the right kind of set of tools, the more impactful you can be. You can spread stories, you can connect with people, you can find ideas, you can find jobs, you can find projects. So being very conscious of mapping out your network, deciding how you want to build your digital profile, and doing this. Again, something that you clearly do. A lot of people do some of these things consciously. My goal was to kind of give this a framework and give this a structure, so that we can go back to that structure and keep refining it. So I've changed over time. And the fourth one is hyperact, which is not attention deficit disorder. I just wanted to stay with the hyper theme. And it's all about trial and error. Basically, executing the idea that we have is key. You can have all the great ideas in the world. If you don't execute, it's useless. And once you execute, you're going to fail. And so you need to learn to fail as experimentation, fail as learning, and basically put your ideas in practice. So it's kind of like be agile, be quick, use a framework, which, by the way, for Hyperact, I apply the agile framework. I think that's a very useful way of describing putting ideas in practice and testing them, but also being comfortable with failure. So those are the four key dimensions of hyperthinking. As you said, I created an online course, again, quite a few years ago, and it suddenly went viral during COVID. And now there's over
How much viral?
Sorry?
How you have a number? How many?
Well, I have 120,000 students,
Wow,
a bit more. And I think a block of
that's impressive.
50,000 joined over COVID. So you could see that there was a traction. I did no advertising. It just happened naturally, organically. So
That's bigger than the Brussels bubble.
Oh yeah, and by the way, surprisingly, a lot in the US, maybe not surprisingly, but India is the second largest country, and then it's kind of distributed across different countries.
So how does the model influence the work culture at ZN, or even the onboarding process at ZN?
Well, I mean, I have, as the owner and founder of my company, I get to change my title on a regular basis. I am CEO now, just, this is more practical. But at some point I was chief hyperthinker. I still have that. And the point is, when you say that to people, say, okay, this is a weird person. What is happening? Some people think it's a strange, disturbing word, but it starts a conversation. And I think it also attracts people who say, I'm curious, I'd like to find out more. It's not a normal company. So the idea is to say, look, this is the culture that we embrace in this company. We want people who are self-learners, who shift their preconceptions, who link online and use their network, and who are not afraid to fail in have an entrepreneurial mindset. So it's very helpful, because it means people know what they sign up for. And with our clients, it's allowing us to have a dialogue. It's like, if you're going to work with ZN, you know that that's part of our cultural framework. And of course, our clients will not share all of that, but it allows them to say, I want to work with a company that has this different culture. And I think in Brussels, at the beginning, I think people thought it was a joke, and probably some still do, but it's a great conversation starter. And I think it makes it clear that we are different, and that we're fully committed to this constant learning journey.
Talking about clients, you have over the years worked with some really impressive brands, both on the business side and also institutions, political clients. From what I recall, you've been engaged in the Jean-Claude Juncker campaign. Could you share some best practices, learnings, and some also key tools that have worked in the past? Because I think that it's also interesting. Well, right now with this drive to do so much digital, we sometimes get lost in looking at things that are just trendy, but the Juncker campaign was 2014, yeah, if I recall right. So, what has worked back then in terms of digital, and how did you manage to make it work?
Yeah, so it was very interesting, because we got the EPP contract to run the Juncker campaign because we were digital, and they said we're not going to run media campaign. We just don't have the budget to do that. It doesn't really work within our organization. So we're going to do this. And by the way, until that time, they hadn't really done campaigns. It was more, okay, we appoint something. I mean, the debate around the Spitzenkandidat. So this was the first kind of official campaign. they said, okay, if we're going to do it, it has to be online. And so I think there was a lot of learning, which is how in a very complex organization like the EPP, with multiple levels, you have the group in parliament, you have the party, you have all the countries. So it's incredibly complicated if you think about, compared to, I would say, a corporate, which has, a hierarchical central decision point. EPP is the most, fragmented, has all sorts of different levels. And so our job is to try to bring one story together and share it online. And I think the thing that, success on a digital campaign goes back to strategy, which is what any campaign should be. Is like, what is the goal? What are we trying to do? And how can we set the parameters of what we're trying to do in a realistic framework? Because there's no point in saying, we're going to reach every European, but we want to engage. So we want to bring together a story for the party and the candidate. And then we want to tell that story to the right audience at the right time, using these tools in a smart way. So one of the things we did was this is more in terms of messaging for the EPP. We created the line, "Believe in people," which was one of the first lines that they kind of embraced as a party. And because then you have a lot of countries saying, well, we love you, but this is not the message for us. And this was kind of really embraced. Even Angela Merkel used it. So it was very accepted. Now, in terms of the campaign itself, we created the website, we created the channels, we were pushing different messages, working with a very large team. But one example that I thought was really interesting was a specific campaign we did around the digital agenda. And this was interesting because Jean-Claude Juncker is not known for his digital savvy. He's the one with
definitely
doesn't have a smartphone. And yet he's a believer in the importance of digital technology as for Europe. So the question is, how do you get Jean-Claude Juncker to tell that story with his personality and the current structure? So what we did is, and this is actually with Martin Salmeyer at the time, and we brainstormed and we said, okay, let's do a video. And the video was, you don't have to be a techie to believe in technology. And basically, there was a joke that Berlin Monster, a parody account, had posted at the time showing Juncker with a kind of old kilt. And so we took that and we embraced it. So we actually had Jean-Claude Juncker in front of an old desk with plume, writing a message saying, this is ready to be tweeted. And this was basically the core of the story. So it went viral. Had over
was that the first Brussels made real-time marketing activity?
It was the most successful political communication in that election cycle, that single piece. So if you Google, you don't have to be a techie to believe in technology, Juncker, you'll see it's still there. It's quite funny. Jean-Claude Juncker is a very funny person. I mean, the way he delivered that, it's one take. He did the take left, and it was really good. And he's got this kind of, again, you have to capture the unique personality of the client and bring it online in the right way. And that created a whole discussion on all social media saying, hey, this is funny, this is great, this is really interesting. Even if you don't like Juncker, you still got to give it to him that it's very smart. And so we managed to make him look like he was actually understanding digital tools well enough to make his point. And of course, the policy was real, but the tone and the message was there. So I think that was very successful. And it shows that, the creativity is not in, you have to be in line with the personality and the values of your client. And then you have to take them into that new space and make them resonate with the audience. So that was a very interesting piece of communication in a very challenging environment.
What are the other projects that Satin did where you had the feeling that you're truly doing something for the first time within the Brussels bubble space, and you felt like pioneering with something that might be a proof of concept also to get other clients on board?
Yeah, so the projects that I really am very excited about and think are transformative. there are quite a few, but just to give you two examples, one is the Discover EU project. So this was an idea that came out of two activists and that Manfred Weber embraced, which was we should give a free Interrail ticket to every young European on their 18th birthday. That was the idea.
I remember
Why?
that. Yeah.
Because, sorry?
I remember that campaign very well. Yeah.
So basically, the idea was, why do we do that? Because if you experience Europe, if you travel around Europe, you can see what it is, the advantage of having a single currency, the different cultures. You meet young people. It's formative. For a lot of people, this Interrail trip can be a kind of first experience of really traveling around Europe. So that was the idea. Manfred Weber was really interested in that, and he said, I want to make this happen. And we said, yes, that's great, because we were the agency working with them. But we said, let's turn this into a campaign. Let's not just kind of get a bill in Parliament and negotiate behind the scenes, but let's get young people to connect. So we created a campaign called Discover EU. And this campaign was basically saying to young people, look, if you want this to happen, we need your support. And so it was no longer Brussels is going to do something good for you. It was, if you want this, you have to join us. And to do that, share a story of Europe, like take a photo of a tree, of a pub, of a lake, of something that means something to you, put it online and get your friends to vote for it, because that's what Discovering Europe is all about. So we kind of created this viral mechanism. Millions of people took part in different parts of the campaign. We also, Manfred was also very kind of part of the campaign, telling the story on a train, meeting young people, so a great thing. And then we had young Interrail travelers traveling around Europe, telling the story of their experience, connecting it to political issues. And in the end, it became a bill that was voted on and now is a commissioned project. So for, the great thing is you say, okay, from an idea, this became a campaign. The campaign changed legislation and basically became a new way of approaching Europe. And now it's kind of being rolled out progressively over the years. So every year, tens of thousands of these tickets are being given to Europeans. So that was great. And again, I think it was because a lot of people say, yeah, but the internet is not really, for Brussels, it doesn't really work. You have to be behind the scenes and all that. It's like, no, it's the combination. This is really what I tell people is like, of course, the understanding of the political framework is very important. But once you combine that with a digital communication plan that links to that, then you can be much more effective. And at certain points, even the EU was thinking, can we still push this and all that? And once they saw the groundswell of support there was for it, they said, yeah, there are people who really want that. And actually people in Brussels were pushing back, saying, this is a waste of money, we've got other priorities, etc. But, hundreds of thousands of young Europeans saying, no, we want this. So I think this was really the showing how transformative this can be.
Philip, I'm sure we share the same experience, and you actually mentioned it before. How resistant the elites of the Brussels bubble, the lobbying professionals, public affairs, political communication professionals, are to the digitalization of communication. And I've seen this many times with also approaching clients with innovative concepts that there's just no openness to this, to even discuss the possibilities. Why do you think this community of professionals who should be rather well informed about what's trending and what works around the continent, because we are not talking about tools that are truly innovative in the sense that in other industries like consumer marketing or even financial marketing, they're already used. These are not tools that have been introduced just today. So why do you think is the Brussels bubble as a whole so slow in adapting innovation in terms of how the communication, how advocacy is done?
So I would say that this is true and not true at the same time. I think there is a resistance to change that's part of human nature. And in Brussels, you don't get punished for not trying new things. Traditional public affairs has a huge amount of revenue that continues to come because there's a massive demand for it, and that keeps growing. So, if you're saying, well, look, I have a business, it's working, why should I change it? If you're inside the commission, as long as you're doing what your boss tells you, you're okay. And if there's a problem, again, even if you mess it up, as long as you follow instructions, you're not going to be punished. So neither of these two things are encouraging people to take risks and do things differently. So there is a natural resistance to change, which every human being has. And that's why, for me, you need to create frameworks to encourage people to explore new things and take risks and experiment. And I think on the institutional side, it's really, you're not incentivized in any way to be a risk taker. I know a lot of people, by the way, inside the commission who are very innovative, who are doing some amazing stuff, but their talent is not being fully recognized. They don't get bonuses and promotions like they might in the corporate sector. So that I think is an issue. And I really wish the commission would really shine the spotlight on people doing great work, because I think it would help tremendously. Now, on the other side, there are individuals in every company, and especially younger people coming up today, who now recognize these new platforms. And to some degree, obviously, digital is no longer super innovative. This is basically conventional communication now. But ironically, in some companies, it's still not understood as core. I still have conversations with clients about, should we go on the internet, on LinkedIn, on X or whatever, because you have all these waves of, okay, we should, but it's scary, but it's new, but it's dangerous. So what do we do? But now I think, people accept that these things are important and core. So it's, again, doing social media today is not an indication that you're open to innovation. It's more, I'm doing what was part of things. But I would say, the major reason why Brussels as a whole tends to be conservative is because it works for a lot of people and organizations. You are safe in your job. If you do what you're told, you can spend quite a lot of money, and the results of your campaign are often not measured. So you get paid as a consultant for the hours you've done. As long as you've delivered and the client's happy, they're okay to pay. They don't really need to see an increase in sales, because the results are always very difficult to track. It's always very indirect. Now, I would say that there is a growing group, I believe, of people who are very interested in new and different things, ranging from social media to AI. And I think you're part of this community, and you can see them on LinkedIn talking about the new things they're doing, talking about AI, talking about these things. And surprisingly, I mentioned this to you earlier, AI is attracting a tremendous amount of interest from the public affairs crowd. And I find that fascinating, because I think AI as a tool today, either it's ChatGPT, which you use to create content and do a bit of analysis, but it's not an organizational tool that you can transform the way you operate with. It is, but I'm saying that's not the part I think people are working on right now. I think they're just looking at the surface level tools. So I think people are interested in change. And this change, I think, with AI doesn't cost them anything. So it's like, okay, we can find out, we can see how it can help us, but we don't have to take a big personal risk. I think, to me, the issue in Brussels and in the EU is that there is a problem with risk taking. And if you want to create different things, you have to take risks. And there has to be a system and a culture which allows and rewards successful risk taking, and even when the risk doesn't pay off, doesn't punish you. So I think that's part of the frame why it's much easier to do the conventional thing. And I see people even posting on LinkedIn and otherwise saying, well, actually, Brussels isn't really, doesn't need different things, and it's quite boring and quite normal. And it's almost like a way of reassuring themselves. I think that's fundamentally wrong. Change continues to accelerate under our feet. You know, the populist movements, the new channels emerging, these are all real changes. And yes, it doesn't touch the Brussels bubble because it's still protected, but it is transforming the rules of the game. And I think the faster we can adapt to that, the more we can start perhaps addressing some of the critical issues that we're facing as a society.
That's a very good, I think, diagnosis of the problem. But if I may just add one thing to that, that I often tell to my clients who are struggling to understand the advantage of using digital tools, is that because of this situation that you very well described, doing the digital part of your communications well is still quite a low-hanging fruit. So if you do it well, you can outperform your competition in the digital space, in owning the discussions, in even owning the Google results on your topic, because nobody else is doing it. So I think that especially to potential clients hearing this part of the podcast, I think this is really something to look into. And you also mentioned AI. I think that anyone trying to do some teaching, coaching on AI, looking for AI training for their team should also ask for training that could involve the analysis of risks associated with the use of AI today, both on the data security level, but also just coming across in the wrong way. Because, for example, I have the feeling that you can very easily tell if a LinkedIn post was written by AI without review, and this just doesn't look okay. So, and also anything new and trendy is worth analyzing, and you have to be open, as you also said about the right mental model to have in today's world. But this openness cannot overshadow the reality that of what works and what is important right now. You, Philip, you mentioned also the need for measuring results and the lack of opportunities to measure results in public affairs. That's a very interesting question that I actually have prepared for today, and that is about how you think, what is the best way to measure results of policy, political communication? How do you do that at ZN, and what kind of metrics do you recommend to clients when talking about a project? Because obviously, when you talk to niche target groups, you will not go for reach or number of likes, because that's not the most important metric.
Yeah, so I just want to come back to one of your points earlier about what is being done as a quick win. And I think you're right. Essentially, yes, being present is already an advantage. But I think doing the simple things right is surprisingly difficult, which means, do you have a clear message? Has it been defined? Do you have your message house? Is it clearly defined across all the countries and the organizations that you're working with? Do you have a common narrative? How does it express itself across different audiences? And then do you use your tools like a website, your social channels, your newsletter to convey those stories and all the video material and all that? So bringing all that story together and then having your ambassadors adapt that story from their perspective. That, I think, we have a couple of clients doing that. And I think you can see these things being done in different places, but it's still a lot of organizations still don't have the basic things in place. So I think getting that to work is already, I think that's where the low-hanging fruit is. And then there's another thing, which Brussels is very important for. You know, we talked about risk before. Now, we've worked in a lot of client areas, you know, from vaccines to chemicals to technology. And a lot of clients are saying, well, if we start communicating, we're going to get attacked. I mean, this is, you know, we've worked for 15 years in the vaccine space. So, and this is, you know, this is a very, very real fear. I'm going to be attacked. And then my client, so if it's an association, the companies have a legal process and they need to understand that. So you can't just post stuff online and just, you know, make sure it's okay. You have to understand what's the legal context in which you're posting, what's the potential of an attack, how do you deal with it, how do you escalate it from a comms perspective, from a legal perspective. So you know, a post is not just
Very
a
important
post.
point.
A
Yeah.
post has to be understood within that framework of, and you know, that's where the complexity of our clients is real. They do work in very big organizations with a lot of constraints. So we need to bring them onto that story. Sorry, actually, I digressed from your initial question. If you could, if
No,
you
but that
can
was
remember.
very valuable insight. So good that you picked up on that. Yeah. The question was about measuring results and
Yeah.
how you actually do that well, and what kind of metrics do you recommend to clients when discussing a project?
Yeah, so this is a question that we had a lot about at the beginning of our work, which is how do you measure results with an internet campaign? Now, my first answer was, well, how do you measure results of your campaigns in general? So, you know, there's no point in saying we're going to measure results of the internet campaign if you haven't defined a framework to measure the success of your campaign. And to me, often the answer to the question is like, well, we don't measure the success. And you say, that's kind of weird. And here is a great advantage of the web. At least we can measure a lot of data points. Okay, so it's much easier to measure a digital campaign than a public affairs campaign, which involves an event and a couple of conversations, because you don't really know what impact it really had. And Brussels is quite used to this. And so there's an ironic thing about having people saying, I'd like to see exactly what we're going to achieve in terms of key performance indicators, but we haven't actually applied this to our communication for the last 10 years. So what we say is you need a strategic objective and you want to set the metrics of your campaign in a global framework. It doesn't make sense for it to be to digital and not the rest. So what are you trying to achieve? Okay, we need to influence this group. We need to raise awareness on this topic. We need to move the needle on this legislation. Okay, is there something that we can measure that would be an indicator of progress in that space? And then, I mean, this is the KPI setting exercise. And then you say, okay, that means if there's a lot of discussion on that topic, we can consider that a successful OKR or KPI. So you set these, I would say, big goals, and then you go to the traditional metrics. How many followers do I have? How many people engage with my content? So you know, there are the easy metrics, which is the stuff that you can measure on the web, and you have a lot of data. And in fact, you have generally way too much data. You know, once you set the report with 50 pages of data, they go like, okay, just I don't need that. That's too much. So we just say, okay, let's identify 3 to 5 data points that we're going to look at that are meaningful. And then the reality is we're going to look at qualitative KPIs, qualitative indicators of success. And those are ironically most of the time the ones that matter the most, which is, hey, my CEO just saw that post and really thought it was cool. And suddenly your entire campaign is validated because it's been signed off by the key person.
100%.
Or a journalist has written and used your post or your hashtag or something like that in their content, and it's got a bit of traction in the bubble around something. So these are often the qualitative indicators. It's the right people getting it and liking your message and reinforcing, and this is really the key, the overall strategic approach. So, we had a goal. We were trying to, focus on this particular topic, on sustainability or some of that. And we managed to get our story that explains very clearly with emotion, with good storytelling, what this is about. And we now see that a couple of key MEPs, a couple of people in the commission, and some decision makers and influencers have captured that. And by the way, a great example of this is our EU influencer event you mentioned at the beginning of the conversation. If you look at the last couple of weeks, we had our event. We get a tremendous amount of visibility. For us, what matters is that we're getting visibility for ZN within a very important group of people to which you're a part of, which are the EU influencers, and that they recognize ZN as an important player in the space. And of course, our clients say, oh, you're able to connect with this community. And then this community is talking about EU influencer event, ZN, and some of the topics we did. So that's a very straightforward illustration of how we apply that strategy in the bubble.
And also the EU influencer list and ranking is something that has also grown. It was one list, and now this year you published three lists. Does this mean that the Brussels bubble is really becoming more digitalized, and this digitalization is real in a shift mode to, I've seen even, something that is a new thing, MEPs joining LinkedIn recently. So I think we're really onto something here. Would you agree?
Yeah, so just on your last point, we've actually done a study of MEPs and all the MEPs and their social behavior, so which channels they're using. Surprisingly, or not, I don't know, they're still on X as the major platform. Facebook, LinkedIn is coming quite low, but so I don't expect LinkedIn to be the go-to place for MEPs, but for Brussels and in the room, LinkedIn was a very big place. And I think what we're seeing with LinkedIn is basically it becoming normal for anyone to have a profile, post from time to time, engage on certain topics. If they have a deeper expertise, they might write some more deeper content. These are some of the people that we recognize because they dive into certain areas that matter to EU policy or to the EU bubble. So I think digital is becoming normalized. I think it will be increasingly strange for people not to have a digital presence, which was not the case before. So I think people are accepting that digital is the new normal. It's the baseline. You have to be present on those channels. As an organization, I think there's still a lot of work to do, especially to organize the digital strategy so that you connect what's happening at corporate, what's happening in Brussels, what's happening in the countries, what's happening in your associations into a kind of logical or at least integrated conversations. I think that's one of the big challenges that they're facing.
And it's definitely a good trend for the openness of the debate because what I think we both agree is that for a long time, way too long, Brussels as an industry was existing in this sort of echo chamber where we were just discussing things among the same old crowds, and now with what the internet does is that the discussion is open on social media, and it's also more accessible thanks to all these that you mentioned earlier in the conversation, innovative translation capabilities. So, I post on LinkedIn in English, but anyone using English in their native language that is not English can read my posts in either French, Portuguese, Polish, whatever language they want. So that's a really cool thing. And I'm coming here to a question because we also see that the interest that the European politics are driving across the continent in local media is growing. Brussels is becoming a topic. I can see that very well in the Polish media. Couple of years ago, media reported about Brussels mostly when there was a European election, and that was it. Or something really interesting happened. Now it's an ongoing thing, what the European Commission did, what our MEPs said, and so on and so forth. Do you think this opens new opportunities also, for agencies like ZN to offer more services that are also building on this growth of interest? How do you think it will influence the debate and how campaigns are approached by clients?
So I think the Brussels bubble, as you've described very well, is a pretty kind of small group of people that has spent a lot of time, in the last 50 years, focused on its own community and saying, well, people outside this bubble don't really understand it, and often the bubble was not that interested in engaging outside. This has changed dramatically in the last 10 years, starting a little bit before, but I would say, obviously things like Brexit, but also the elections, a number of other trends, and the rise of Euroscepticism have made this space much more interesting. And the internet is a great enabler. Now, we typically had conversations with clients in the past where they said, well, here's an issue. We'd like to do we want to connect with the European public. And you're kind of going like, all 400 million of them, or, what do you mean? And they never really meant the public. They meant they want to feel like they're talking to the public, but all they're talking to is the bubble. Now, I think the reality now is that you can talk to a much broader audience. It's still a very niche audience. It's not 400 million people, but it might be 10,000 people who are experts in this particular topic, and they're not sitting in Brussels. They are sitting in different cities. They don't all work in English. Sometimes they work a bit in English and in other things. And so the internet is allowing us to have those conversations. I think that's a change, and I think it requires a change of mindset, understanding, okay, let's create content that can resonate with those people. And sometimes, in the case of vaccines, almost all the time, we want to involve parents and individuals and citizens, not just the professionals on policy, because everybody has a direct interest in this story. The other thing that I think is very interesting is the rise of the importance of the new channels, Instagram, TikTok, more video format, which is still not, very prevalent in Brussels, but we've been recognizing this. You mentioned the list at the EU Influencer event. We've been recognizing these people because a lot of them talk to the public, and they talk about climate change to the Brussels audience and beyond, and to much younger people. And I think they are becoming much more important. And by the way, Donald Tusk was a master of Instagram, actually, before it was that popular, and he was posting content when he was in Brussels, which was getting a lot of traction on quite specific issues, and he got kind of the media to pick up on these stories. And so it was already, I think, a precursor of how this can be used. I don't think it's understood and structured yet in companies, but I also think we're seeing MEPs that are using YouTube, Instagram to reach out to people, and again, to raise that awareness. So I think we're going to see further transformation. And again, this is something very difficult for people in Brussels to think, because they're used to saying, this is Brussels. These are the people that matter. This is what I need to talk to. This is why I'm doing my event and all that. And suddenly the world is much bigger and these people matter. And I've seen people saying, no, they don't matter. They just ignore them. Let's focus on what we know, and let's just be, let's be clear. And it's like, yes, this is good for, maybe this works today, but I think you need to start increasingly looking at that new space, that new fragmentation. And I think that, as a person who believes in the European idea, that it's good to have this institution, again, with all its imperfections, but it's a positive project. and people need to understand it better, and the people in the city need to communicate outside to make their case so that they can bring people with them, change the story. So I think this is happening. And I think digital is a very big part of why this is happening, because I think the traditional press is still struggling to tell those stories in a kind of engaging way. Whereas on social media, you're seeing people doing a lot better work directly communicating to people on these stories.
Indeed. And, I was expecting that, given that we both work in this digital communication field, that we will complain a little bit on the state of matters. But to be honest, I feel that this was mostly a optimistic and positive looking forward conversation, because we're just witnessing, that's how I see this, a development of new best practices, and the minds of people in the Brussels bubble are opening to innovation. So I think this is also for professionals, both on the digital side but also on the more traditional side, those who need to learn or hyper learn. This is also an exciting moment. I think you can agree with that. But before I let you go, Philip, I have two questions that may surprise you, although if you watch some of the episodes of the past podcast in full, maybe not. And one of those questions is if I would give you a magic wand that would allow you to change something for the better in the Brussels bubble, just by saying some magic words. Is there something you would like to change that would make the Brussels bubble as an industry, as a place to work and live, a better place?
So I think the most important thing, I think the most transformative thing would be to inject a heavy dose of entrepreneurial energy into the city. There are quite a few entrepreneurs already, like you, like me. We see some of these on different channels, but I think if we can bring that mindset in the institutions, in the different companies, and start trying different things at an accelerated pace, I think we'll start finding new ways of communication, formats, and things like that. And I think not being afraid that those things won't work. That's why for me, hyperthinking is basically, it's okay. Even if it sounds a bit ridiculous to some serious Brussels lobbyists, it's like, what the hell is that? It's okay. We're trying something new. It might not make sense, but you know what? We have to try these experiments with, let's go into the metaverse and do something stupid and see what happens. Let's create a community online. Let's do a kind of engaged discussion on something. And I think we need to try that. I think the more the EU can come behind that, the more we're going to see this. And by the way, we were involved with TEDx Brussels in its creation. I was one of the founders, and there was so much entrepreneurial energy in Brussels. You see it in the periphery. You see people who are not just sitting in Brussels, but who are connected to Brussels. So I think it's there in the background. I think there's great potential, but we need to kind of make it something aspirational. So we need people to say, I want to do something exciting, new, and different. And I want to be ambitious about it. And I want to be I want to communicate on that and inspire other people to join me in these new experiments.
I couldn't agree more. The potential of Brussels as a city, as a place where so many important things are debated and happen for the entire continent is fascinating. But it's truly not fully explored yet by innovation, and the potential is probably still hidden in many areas. Now, another question I very often ask to my guests is the question about work-life balance. Philip, when you hear the word work-life balance with your entrepreneurial experience of running your own business, is it something you have a good grasp of? What do you think when I say work-life balance?
Well, I would say quite advanced in my entrepreneurial journey. So I think the thing that's most important is, have the basis, respect the fundamentals, sleep, exercise, eat well, those kind of things. I think you need for, just not to die of a heart attack and to lead a healthy life. In terms of the balance between work and leisure, let's say, I think as an entrepreneur, you'll know that when you're starting a company, when you're building a company, um, it's going to be there 24/7, which means you will, if a client calls and there's a problem, you need to pick it up, um, and you need to check that everything you're doing is working. And there's a huge amount of uncertainty. Now, I happen to like that. I happen to, I've never had a I've never been employed. I've always been an entrepreneur. So for me, it's totally fine. And by the way, my wife's family has many doctors, and work-life balance for doctors is very challenging. You have surgeries, you have emergencies, you're on the call 24/7. So I thought in that respect, it's not too bad. The entrepreneur actually has more flexibility, I would say, than a doctor. So for me, the important thing is to have agency, which means you decide when you travel, when you take a break, when you do things, and you make sure that what you've chosen as an entrepreneur is what energizes you, what motivates you. So when I travel, I take my laptop, I take my phone. I don't mind. I think it's fine. I'm not gonna, it doesn't mean I'm not gonna put it aside. In fact, my phone is always on silence. So I will check it, but not if I'm having a conversation, it'll be aside. So I think you need to find the rules that work for you and that give you the right level of energy. Now, I love what I do. So for me, thinking about a problem, a challenge, something interesting, I really, really enjoy this. So it gives me energy. It's not, I don't go home and go like, oh my God, I'm so tired. I hate all this work, the 9 to 5 mentality. So I think as an entrepreneur, we tend to gravitate towards things that motivate us and energize us. At the same time, I think you need to protect your health and make sure that you can also have the time for your relationships, to nurture them. And I've been fortunate enough that I've been able to do that through the ups and downs of the journey. I don't think an entrepreneur can really talk about work-life balance as such. I would say it's probably having the right work-life energy. And by the way, even the word work-life, as if work is separate from your life, to me is absurd. I mean, some of the work conversations I have are incredibly inspiring, and it's not, I don't consider that it's separate. I mean, it's what we do a large part of our life. So I think you should be doing what you enjoy. So my advice to people is find the balance that works for you. I would also say find the most entrepreneurial path that you can. And by the way, today there's far more possible entrepreneurial paths than there were available to us 5, 10 years ago. So you can find a job with a project and a client that allows you to kind of organize your life in the way that really inspires you and motivates you. So I think it's kind of create the canvas of the life that you want, make those decisions, and then of course, you enjoy the benefits of it once you have, I would say, once you've gone through the initial founding cycles. As an entrepreneur, you have to accept that you're always going to have like ups and downs. It's never going to be steady and straightforward. But for those who enjoy that, I would say go for it and embrace it fully.
So regardless of the path you choose, if I'm interpreting your advice correctly, the key in having a good, call it a work-life balance or work-life energy, is choosing a path in life that will provide you positive energy and a good feedback and satisfaction, because that makes it possible to have a balanced and good energy regardless of the amount of work you have to do. Am I understanding this correctly?
Exactly. I think, nobody becomes an entrepreneur because we're looking for work-life balance. We're excited and we're slightly insane and irrational. And so you say, hey, I'm going to try this thing. It's not mapped out for me. but that excites me. I think once you're in it, then you start creating a structure and you adapt. But to me, what's exciting, and I'm sure it's the same for you, is that every day you get to decide how to organize it. And then, okay, I can decide for next month, next year, do I need to change certain things and adapt them? Do I need to work more on this because I want to generate more money, or I want to get more interesting conversations? But it's that constant decision that you get to make, which I think is this incredible privilege that we have. That's why I would recommend that life. And of course, protecting the most important things. But maybe the one thing that I think in work-life balance, which is very important, which is not to fall. And I posted this on LinkedIn a couple of years ago, and it got a lot of traction. It's like not to fall for the trap of busyness. And that's the thing that I think I hate the most about the corporate world. It's people who just work to be seen to work hard. So, I'm working till 11 o'clock at night or midnight, 7 days a week, etc. And I think that's the old culture, which people say, okay, that's a hardworking person. They hope they're going to get promoted through that. I think they will burn out. They are generally incompetent because they generally get sucked into things that are not that useful, and they're not making decisions about what's the most important thing that I need to put my energy on. And I think, again, as an entrepreneur, you need to choose what is it I'm going to do next. So I would say the most dangerous thing is this busyness trap, or this idea of manifesting hard work as a virtue. What you need is to focus on results. And for that, you need fresh energy. You need to be smart. You need to work hard, but in a focused way at the right time. So that would be my advice to people, is kind of understand the difference between busy work and smart work. And if you can do that all the time, you refine your decision process, you get more and more effective, and you can be more and more successful.
And especially with all the tools that we now have to make our work better, easier, and smarter. Thank you, Philip, very much for your time today and for all those of a massive amount of insights. I'm sure this conversation will be very interesting for our listeners and viewers. So, yeah, thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you. I look forward to more opportunities like this, of course, with you. And to our listeners, thank you very much for joining us today. This was another episode of the EU Bubble Insider, and our guest was Philip Weiss, the CEO and founder of ZN. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.